Imagine waking up in 2026, grabbing your phone, opening the news, and reading the headline, Senate of Rome approves new infrastructure bill for the eastern provinces. No United States. No European Union. No NATO. Just one empire. One law. One flag, the eagle, and the SPQR still flying over every major city on Earth. This is not a fantasy. This is a thought experiment grounded in real Roman history, real Roman sociology, and real Roman daily life. And once you understand how Romans actually lived, not the Hollywood version, but the documented, archaeological, and historically verified version, you will start to see something fascinating. Rome was not just an empire, it was a civilization with a trajectory, and that trajectory, had it not been interrupted, would have collided directly with modernity. Now, historians debate the fall of Rome constantly. Edward Gibbon's monumental work from the 18th century blamed Christianity, political decay, and military overextension. More recent scholars like Peter Heather point to external pressures from migrating Germanic peoples. Bryan Ward-Perkins, in his 2005 book The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization, argues the collapse was catastrophic and material pottery quality declined, literacy dropped, long-distance trade merely vanished. The fall was real. The consequences were enormous. But here's the critical question we are asking today. What if none of that happened? What if Rome had stabilized, adapted, and survived into 2026? What would a normal Roman family look like? How would they eat, dress, worship, vote, educate their children, and entertain themselves? To answer that, we have to go back to the real Rome first, because the family we are about to meet is built entirely on documented Roman social structures, values, and habits. No fiction, no guessing, just Rome, projected forward. And if you find this kind of deep historical analysis interesting, the kind that actually makes you think you already know what to do, hit that subscribe button, because this channel is exactly where you want to be. Drop a like if you think this alternate history deserved to be explored. And tell me in the comments, do you think Rome could have survived? I genuinely want to know your answer. In ancient Rome, the family unit was called the familia, and it was nothing like what we think of today. The paterfamilias, the father held absolute legal authority over every person living under his roof. Wife, children, slaves, and sometimes extended relatives. This was documented in Roman law, going back to the 12 Tables around 450 BC, and persisted for centuries. But here's what most people miss: the Roman family was not just a social unit, it was an economic unit, a religious unit, and a political unit all at once. The father was not just a dad, he was a priest, a judge, and a manager simultaneously. So let us meet our family in 2026. Their name is the gens Aurelius, a middle-class family living in what we would call Rome today, though in this alternate timeline it is simply called Urbs the city. Marcus Aurelius Varro is 44 years old. He works for the municipal administration, what the Romans called the cursus honorum, the structured career path of public service. His wife, Livia Aurelia, is 41 and runs a small textile business from home, exactly the kind of female-led domestic commerce that was thoroughly documented in Pompeii through wall inscriptions and receipts. Their two children are Gaius, 17, and Tullia, 13. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because this family is Roman, truly Roman, their daily life in 2026 carries the full weight of Roman culture projected into modernity, and that projection is going to look very, very different from anything you have ever seen. The apartment they live in would still be called an insula, a multi-story residential building. Rome was famous for these. Archaeologists and historians like Andrew Wallace-Hadrill have documented that most Romans, even in the height of the empire, did not live in grand villas. They lived in apartment blocks, sometimes 6 or 7 stories tall, often noisy, sometimes dangerous. In 2026, their insula would be a modern high-rise, but its architecture would carry unmistakable Roman DNA. Arched windows, columns integrated into the facade, terracotta tones, open atrium lobbies with fountains at the center. Every building entrance would have a small altar, the lararium dedicated to the lares, the household gods, not as a quirky decoration, as a functioning religious fixture, because in this timeline, Roman polytheism never lost to Christianity. The traditional Roman religion, with its Senate-approved pantheon, its festivals, its augurs and priests, continued to evolve alongside Roman civilization. The streets outside would be wide, grid-planned, and built to last because that is what Romans did. They built roads that still exist today after 2,000 years. In this timeline, urban planning would be a civic religion. Every neighborhood would have its thermopolium, the Roman fast food counter updated, of course, but operating on the same commercial principle documented in Pompeii: quick, affordable, hot food served at stone counters to working people. Let us walk through a real Tuesday with this family. Not a special day, just a Tuesday in 2026. Marcus wakes up at dawn because Romans woke up at dawn. This was not laziness or luxury. The Roman day was divided by sunlight. The first hour began at sunrise, and the working world operated accordingly. Documented accounts from figures like Pliny the Younger describe the typical Roman schedule. Morning was for work, midday for rest, afternoon for leisure and social life. Marcus does not make coffee. He makes posca, a drink that Roman soldiers and common citizens consumed regularly, water mixed with vinegar or sour wine, sometimes flavored with herbs. Historical records confirm this was the everyday drink of working Romans, not a punishment drink. It was practical, preserved hydration, and mildly acidic in a way that made it safer than untreated water. In 2026, in our alternate Rome, Posca would be sold in aluminum cans with sleek SPQR branding. The TV commercial you would see between programs would show a Roman legionary updated with modern equipment, but still wearing Lorica-inspired body armor, cracking open a can with the tagline, "Since the Republic, for the Empire." The ad ends with the eagle logo and a synth orchestra version of a triumphal march. It is aggressive, proud, and deeply Roman. Nothing like a Coca-Cola ad. Everything like a civilization that never forgot who it was. Livia begins preparing the family lunch. The prandium is the midday meal, which was historically the most important of the day. Contrary to the Hollywood image of Romans constantly feasting on exotic foods, the documented diet of a middle-class Roman family was remarkably simple. Grain and bread formed the absolute foundation. Archaeobotanical evidence from Pompeii and Herculaneum, analyzed by researchers, including Mark Robinson and colleagues, confirms that Romans ate enormous quantities of lentils, chickpeas, olives, olive oil, cheese, salted fish, garum-seasoned preparations, vegetables like cabbage and onions, and occasional pork or chicken. So Livia is in the kitchen, a modern kitchen, but decorated with terracotta tiles and a mosaic of the goddess Ceres above the stove, because Ceres is the goddess of grain and harvest, and you do not cook without acknowledging Ceres. She is making pulse, a thick grain porridge that has been a Roman staple since before the Republic, but updated chickpea and spelt porridge with roasted garlic, olive oil, and a reduction of garum-style fermented fish sauce that would be bottled today and sold in every Roman supermarket. Alongside that, flatbread baked that morning, olives from the family's countryside supplier, and a hard cheese that would be called pecorino in our timeline, but in this one carries a Latin product name stamped with the seal of the guild that produced it. While the food cooks, the family gathers in the living area. The TV is on, and this is where things get extraordinarily interesting, because Roman entertainment when projected into 2026 is almost impossible to imagine through a modern Western lens. The gladiatorial games were banned in 404 AD by Emperor Honorius, but in this timeline they never stopped. They evolved. The modern Colosseum reconstructed, expanded, broadcast globally hosts what in this world is called Munera Nova, modern games. The competitors are professional athletes who train in specialized schools called ludi, just as gladiators did historically. They do not fight to the death. That evolution happened gradually over centuries. But the combat sports broadcasting in 2026, Roman television combines elements of wrestling, martial arts, and theatrical performance in ways that make UFC look like a school play. Marcus and Gaius are watching the regional championship on a widescreen panel. The broadcast team speaks formal Latin, mixed with modern vernacular, the linguistic evolution of Latin, which never died in this timeline, produced a language that sounds something like Latin mixed with Italian, Spanish, and Romanian simultaneously, because those were exactly the linguistic descendants of Latin in our own world. The sports broadcast cuts to a commercial. A phone manufacturer let us call them Mercurius Tech, named after the god of communication and commerce, is advertising their new device. The store in the commercial is designed like a Roman forum, marble floors, open archways, staff wearing modern tunics in the company's colors. The product display tables are carved stone with embedded screens. The tagline is in Latin Vox Omnibus, voice for all. And the sales representative in the ad wears a tunic that falls to the knee, belted in deep purple and gold, the colors of empire democratized for the consumer market. His sandals are leather and modern. His wristband is a smart device styled like a Roman bracelet. He looks utterly normal to everyone in this world. He looks like something from another planet to us. After lunch, which the family eats together, reclining on cushioned seats around a low table, because Roman dining furniture was historically low and reclining, a practice confirmed by archaeological finds and written accounts from Martial and others, Gaius leaves for his afternoon lessons. Roman education was a serious, structured affair. The historian Quintilian, writing in the 1st century AD, produced a comprehensive educational philosophy in his work Institutio Oratoria that covered everything from early childhood learning to advanced rhetoric. In this 2026 timeline, that educational tradition never broke. Roman schools called scholae follow a curriculum built on the original Roman trivium grammar, rhetoric, and logic, expanded across centuries to include mathematics, philosophy, natural sciences, and engineering. There are no standardized international tests like PISA in this world. There's the cursus academicus, a state-administered progression that determines your civic track, your career path, and ultimately your role in the cursus honorum if you pursue public life. Gaius wants to be an engineer, a mechanicus in Roman terminology, and his afternoon classes take place in a school whose courtyard is designed as a functional Roman garden, with a fountain at the center, shade colonnades, and philosophical inscriptions carved into the walls. Students debate publicly. Rhetoric is not optional. It is the core skill, because in a society where the Senate still matters, where public speech still carries legal and civic weight, being unable to argue effectively is a genuine social disability. Meanwhile, Tullia stays home and works with Livia, not because girls are excluded from education, but because in this alternate Roman timeline, female education largely followed historical Roman patterns where upper and middle-class women received substantial private education in literature, music, and household management, while also participating in commerce. Livia's textile business uses an accounting system descended directly from Roman commercial practice. The receipts she writes are formatted with formulas that would be recognizable to any Roman merchant from the 1st century AD, now digitized through Mercurius Tech tablets. The political structure of this world deserves special attention. Rome never fully abandoned its republican traditions. Even during the imperial period, the Senate always existed, always had ceremonial and sometimes real power. In this alternate 2026, the system evolved into something resembling a constitutional monarchy with strong senatorial checks. An emperor who serves as head of state and military commander, a senate that controls legislation and taxation, and elected magistrates who govern provinces and cities. It is not a democracy in the modern sense. It never fully became one. But it is also not a dictatorship. It is something distinctly Roman, a meritocratic oligarchy with documented obligations of the powerful toward the poor, a concept the Romans called clientela, where powerful citizens maintained networks of mutual obligation with those below them. In 2026, clientela looks like a cross between a political party system and a loyalty network, and every Roman family like the Aurelii is embedded in one. Religion in this world is impossible to overstate. The Roman religious system was not a faith tradition in the way Christianity or Islam are. It was a civic practice. You participated in religious rituals because you were a citizen, not because you believed specific doctrines. This religio, the careful performance of ritual obligation, was what held Roman society together. according to scholars like Mary Beard, whose work on Roman religion extensively documents how Roman worship was public, performative, and political. In 2026, this looks like Marcus stopping at the neighborhood temple on his way home to leave a small offering of oil and grain at the altar of Janus, god of beginnings and transitions, at the end of the workday. It takes 3 minutes. It is as routine as stopping at a gas station. The temple is small, modern, with clean marble and digital lighting that mimics torchlight. There is a priest, a modern pontifex on duty, keeping records of offerings, maintaining the ritual calendar, and coordinating the upcoming Saturnalia festival, which in this timeline is the biggest cultural event of the year, a week-long celebration in December involving public feasts, gift-giving, theatrical performances, and a temporary reversal of social hierarchies that has deep roots in documented Roman practice. And if you have made it this far, you already know this kind of content is rare. Most channels do not go this deep. If you agree, leave a like right now. It genuinely helps more people find this video. And drop a comment which part of Roman daily life surprised you the most. I read every single one. Now let us be honest, completely honest. There is a reason historians do not generally engage in alternate history as serious academic work. Bryan Ward-Perkins, whom we mentioned earlier, was emphatic. The fall of Rome was not a gentle transition. It was a catastrophe. Literacy dropped. Long-distance trade collapsed. Building in stone nearly disappeared in many regions. The archaeological record is brutally clear. Centuries of accumulated complexity simply disintegrated. But the thought experiment we have been conducting today is not irresponsible speculation. It is a method. By imagining what Rome would look like if its trajectory had continued, we are forced to confront what Rome actually was and what it actually produced. Every detail of the Aurelius family's life in 2026 is grounded in documented Roman practice. The food, the architecture, the education system, the religious habits, the political structure, the commercial customs, the entertainment culture, all of it comes from real sources, real archaeology, real historical scholarship. And what emerges from that exercise is something genuinely striking. Rome was remarkably modern in its instincts. It had apartment buildings and fast food. It had professional athletes and commercial advertising. Ancient political campaigns used graffiti on walls, documented extensively in Pompeii, that functioned exactly like political ads. It had female business owners, documented in commercial receipts and wall inscriptions. It had public welfare programs. The annona, a state grain distribution system that fed hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens. It had infrastructure that served as the literal backbone of an entire civilization. The critic's question, then, is not whether Rome was capable of surviving into 2026. The question is, what we lost when it did not. Ward-Perkins argues that the material quality of life for ordinary people in Western Europe dropped catastrophically after Rome's fall and did not recover for centuries. The pottery evidence alone, Romans produced standardized, high-quality ceramics traded across thousands of miles. Post-Roman pottery is crude, local, and comparatively primitive, tells a story of staggering regression. What we have explored today is not nostalgia for empire, and this is a critical distinction. The Roman Empire was built on slavery, conquest, and extraordinary violence. The Roman family we met today would, in the real ancient version, have owned slaves. Their comfort was built on exploitation, documented in sources from Cato the Elder's agricultural manuals to the legal codes governing enslaved people in Roman law. Any honest engagement with Rome has to hold both truths simultaneously. Rome produced extraordinary civilization and extraordinary brutality, and the two were inseparable. But the intellectual and cultural framework, Rome developed the legal tradition that became the foundation of most modern legal systems, the engineering principles that built structures still standing today, the administrative sophistication that governed millions across 3 continents, the cultural pluralism that allowed a Spaniard like Trajan and a North African like Septimius Severus to become emperors. That framework had a trajectory. And on a Tuesday afternoon in 2026, Marcus Aurelius Varro would come home from his day at the municipal administration, find his wife reviewing her textile business accounts, watch his son explain an engineering principle he learned that afternoon, and sit down to a dinner of spelt porridge and salted fish and olive oil that his ancestors would have recognized completely. He would then switch on the television to catch the evening theatrical program because Romans loved theater deeply, with documented traditions going back to the Ludi Scenici, public theatrical games performed in honor of the gods. In this 2026, the theater industry is vast and state-supported. The evening program might be a modern adaptation of Plautus or Terence comic playwrights from the Roman Republic, whose works have survived, and whose comedies of mistaken identity, domestic conflict, and social satire feel shockingly contemporary. Or it might be new work entirely, building on that tradition with 2,000 additional years of cultural evolution. The family would watch together. They would argue about the plot. Livia would say the playwright was being disrespectful to the old forms. Gaius would defend the modern interpretation. Tullia would already be on her mercurius tech tablet looking up what critics said about it. Marcus would ask everyone's opinion and then give his own. Because in a Roman household, even in 2026, the paterfamilias still gets the last word, though perhaps with slightly more negotiation than in 44 BC. And outside, the city would hum. The fountains, because Rome was famous for water, for its aqueducts, for the engineering miracle of clean running water delivered across hundreds of miles, would still run. They would always run, because in the Rome that never fell, you do not turn off the water. Rome is still here. It just went to bed early, because tomorrow, like the Romans always said, is another day of the cursus. And for us, in the real 2026, looking back at the civilization that actually did fall, the question is not what Rome would have been. The question is what we are still trying to rebuild from its ruins. Think about that. If this video made you think differently about Rome, about civilization, about what we build and what we lose, then share it. Not for the algorithm, because someone in your life needs to see this.